Welcome back to the Game Collection. A couple of years ago, a long-running series took the plunge into turn-based mechanics and ended up turning a ton of heads, mine included, and now they're poised to strike again with a new turn-based follow-up just around the corner. So it's probably got a lot of people wondering, should you play Yakuza Like a Dragon? Yes, you should. And without further ado, I am SuperDerek, and this is Yakuza Like a Dragon. Yakuza Like a Dragon is a brand new entry point into the Yakuza series, which appears to be pivoting in a number of ways from the Yakuza titles that preceded it. In Japan, the title of the franchise was never actually Yakuza, but it was instead known as Ryoga Gotoku, or Like a Dragon, and it sounds like the Yakuza series is pivoting to just calling itself Like a Dragon in the West, to coincide with its transition to turn-based RPG mechanics. Similarly, the protagonist from the previous entries, Kiryu, the Dragon of Dojima, isn't taking center stage this time around either. A new face is stepping into the red light, and his name is Ichiban Kasuga. And this game is his introduction. Kasuga is an incredibly interesting character, and it is his personality that is responsible for the famous or infamous transition to turn-based combat, depending on your perspective. Kasuga grew up an orphan in Kamurocho, a fictional district of Tokyo based loosely upon Kabukicho, a red light district of Tokyo. Early on, it is revealed that Kasuga was abandoned at birth and ended up being raised by employees of a soapland, essentially a brothel of sorts. Despite that, Kasuga embodies the archetypal diamond in the rough personality where he exists among the crud of the underbelly of Japan, but whose personality is unaffected by it. His idealist sense of justice and pragmatic approach to illegal activities as a means to an end makes him a charismatic force to be reckoned with. Kasuga makes it clear at the beginning of the game that he wants to be a hero, like the kind from classic video games. It's not entirely known at this time what sparked his love for classic turn-based RPGs such as Dragon Quest, not that I can blame him, but that, paired with the mild delusions of grandeur and a healthy dose of trauma-induced psychosis, is what, as best as I can figure it, transforms the world into a haven for turn-based combat. It isn't too long into the game before Kasuga is presented with an opportunity to become a hero of sorts to his adopted family, and to Arakawa, the man he idolizes and took him in off the streets. Kasuga was asked to take the fall for a murder of a Yakuza member belonging to a rival organization. Kasuga agrees to take the fall and begins serving time for that murder in the beginning of 2001. 18 years later, he's released back into the public without a single yen to his name, a stranger in a strange land called Ijincho, a fictional version of Isazakicho that has these weird things called smartphones, a world that has completely passed him by. And it is in this world, with this setup, with this infectiously optimistic and naive protagonist, that we begin our adventure into Like a Dragon. I enjoyed the story of Like a Dragon. This is a spoiler-free review, as with all of my reviews, but it wouldn't be hard to summarize the story by mentioning a few stories you're familiar with and telling you it's a mix of 3 or 4 ideas from each. Several of the plot beats will feel familiar, maybe even predictable at times, but in other ways, it's almost so full of tropes that you have no idea which cliche the game is going to draw on next, which is honestly kind of half of the fun, and that's the key word for this review: fun. Like many games from the golden era of RPGs, Yakuza knows when to take itself seriously and when to let loose and let players enjoy themselves. Because games ought to be fun, and injecting humor into the periphery the way that Like a Dragon does is an incredibly smart way to handle things. The main questline of this game tends to be the more serious side of this game. Some parts of the story are told in a tongue-in-cheek kind of way. Some characters feel like parodies of real-world characters that give me flashbacks of playing Grand Theft Auto San Andreas as a teenager. Yes, there was a point once upon a time when I played non-RPGs, and San Andreas was one of my absolute favorites of all time. So, all of that is to say that Like a Dragon really scratched that itch for me, while also presenting the world in a very similar way. Kamurocho, when explored on foot, is absolutely massive, and because I was strapped for cash for what feels like the vast majority of the game, fast travel via taxi did little to lessen the effect of that vastness. Even just jogging to the nearest taxi could take several minutes, during which point you could easily bump into several bands of roaming gang members, stumble upon tokens, unique events, and side quests. In some ways, the game feels a lot like a mix between more modern Japanese RPGs with the optional side quest trackers a la Xenoblade, and in other ways, it's more like Western action games or RPGs like Red Dead Redemption or the Fallout series. However, Like a Dragon is not just GTA Tokyo, as I've heard it described to me before. There is no driving in this game, there's no shooting, you cannot go on rampages, and the violence isn't quite as wanton. In fact, death feels relatively rare by comparison, which makes the deaths of in-world characters feel far more impactful. Like a Dragon is primarily an RPG that happens to share themes and aesthetics with a GTA game, the same way that the Fallout games are RPGs that share some aesthetics and mechanics with Call of Duty. But when played, you can tell that both Fallout and Like a Dragon are RPGs at their core. So even if Grand Theft Auto games are not your cup of tea, I hope you won't let that deter you from exploring what Like a Dragon has to offer. Beyond Kasuga, the cast of characters in Like a Dragon are pretty dang great. Joining the party early on are Nanba, the homeless nurse with the power of breath attacks. Poisonous halitosis or flaming hot booze breath are hilarious special abilities that are in-character traits that make some kind of sense in this fever dream presentation of Kamurocho. With his medical background, he also has the ability to do some basic healing and other skills that get unlocked as you acquire new job classes, which you also acquire by literally getting another job down at the local temping agency. Adachi, the washed-up detective, is also an absolute favorite for me, and I would love to tell you more, but this game continues to introduce new party members pretty much the whole way through the game. The voices of each were absolutely stellar. In English, I loved picking out the voices of Robbie Daymond, who I knew from Critical Role, George Takei, Johnny Young Bosch, and Prosy D, David Hayter, and there's just so much other talented people in this game. The Japanese voices were also great, as far as I could tell anyway, and the localization is truly a case where both language options are really good, so just pick whichever one you prefer. So I've mentioned this a time or two, but I think it bears mentioning again because it is such a unique selling point of the game. I get the distinct impression that in Like a Dragon, you, the player, are experiencing the world as seen by a slightly insane Ichiban Kasuga, the turn-based combat occurring as Kasuga's Dragon Quest-addled brain's interpretation of what's happening in real life. And what you see on screen is sort of an abstraction of those combat encounters. It's difficult to articulate just how clever of a concept I think this is, and how incredibly funny it is to me at the same time, because this is just the kind of thing that only critics or game designers will probably care about, because we spend a lot of time thinking about the role that abstraction plays in the realm of turn-based RPGs. The story you are seeing in Breath of Fire, for instance, of a band of characters grinding in the woods doesn't literally mean that Ryu, Nina, and the crew are spending days or weeks taking turns attacking and defending, decimating the population of the local wildlife. Not every enemy encounter literally happens in the in-game story. Not every swing of the sword is a canon event. These are instead representations of the idea of the struggles that they might encounter with some monsters in the woods. But Like a Dragon kind of breaks the fourth wall a bit here and says, yeah, this fight is also not exactly a representation of what's actually occurring, and rather than hand-waving it away like most other RPGs do, they address the elephant in the room. Kasuga is legit just seeing things, and it's incredibly convenient that these hallucinations aren't getting him killed. A real Don Quixote type of story where the windmills fight back. It's endlessly unique and charming, and above all else, fits effortlessly into this brand of humor that this game exudes. So let's actually talk a bit more about these mechanics because they're pretty slick. Combat is turn-based. Kasuga and crew initiate combat when you've walked into the line of sight of various gangsters wandering the streets of Kamurocho. If they spot you, their curiosity will be piqued and they might engage you. If you aggro the bad guys by getting too close, they'll chase you down and combat will begin right there in those streets. When combat begins, gang members transform into Sujimon, a monstrous human of sorts. The term Sujimon is kind of a play on the word Pokemon, where Suji in this game means sus. Party members and Sujimon each take turns using regular and special attacks to pummel each other, or special skills to heal or buff companions and debuff enemies and deal damage, the usual fare. Kasuga also has the ability to phone a friend or otherwise summon special allies who show up to deal massive amounts of damage for a small fee. Just another instance of the game retrofitting typical RPG mechanics into a modern setting. Different enemies have different strengths and weaknesses to attacks of different types, and as you unlock skills within certain jobs, they become permanently available to Kasuga and his companions. Combat is quickened up a bit by mapping combat options directly to face buttons, reducing the amount of menu clutter, and using special abilities have real-time button presses and timing-based bonuses not too dissimilar from those found in Super Mario RPG and its contemporaries. As you defeat Sujimon, your character gains experience points, some loot, and of course, details about the Sujimon get stored into your Sujidex. My only note here is that it would have been really nice to be able to sneak up on Sujimon to get the drop on encounters, but also I know that doesn't exactly keep with Kasuga's chivalrous personality. Side quests found throughout Ijincho introduce Kasuga and a huge cast of colorful characters and their various plights that afflict them, and introduce Kasuga to the wide and diverse world within the city of Ijincho, further coloring this game with all kinds of life and personality. Side quests range from helping a little girl collect donations for her little brother's surgery, to helping a numb masochist feel alive again, or protecting the last fruit of a persimmon tree from a variety of unlikely threats. It's through these side quests that not only Kasuga learns about Kamurocho and Ijincho, but also how the player further comes to understand the character of Kasuga himself, his hopes, his dreams, and even at times, his flaws. Or other times Kasuga learns nothing, the player learns nothing, no progress was made, and nobody cares because the experience was hilarious, and humor can be its own reward. In a similar vein, characterization of each of Kasuga's party members can be further developed through missions that may simply involve watching a brief interaction between Kasuga and crew play out at a local jazz bar, where even if we don't get to enjoy the companion's personality as frequently as we do with Kasuga, we can at least learn about their history and what makes each one tick, what skin they have in the game, and how they ended up slumming around with Kasuga. The personalities are all rich and incredibly endearing, and by the end of Like a Dragon, you really begin to feel like you know each of the party members and are rooting for each one to overcome their own struggles. Sometimes you even get to enjoy a bit of banter simply by walking around Ijincho and keeping an eye out for event icons and hoping that an encounter doesn't interrupt the conversation, and it all just helps the crew feel connected more than just a few strangers who happen to bump into each other one day. Further strengthening these bonds are a variety of minigames that Kasuga can engage in, and there's no shortage of minigames to be enjoyed here. If you ever played Shenmue back in the day, it's like that but way further over the top. Participate in karaoke in the form of a time-based DDR-style game, play classic Sega arcade games by walking into a Sega arcade in downtown Ijincho, swing a golf club at some golf balls for a change, or maybe try being a professional kart racer for the game's fully fleshed out built-in kart racer. Or maybe just go collect cans for some spare change and trade in points for music from the Persona soundtrack that you can listen to at the bar. The game is huge, and I know I'm only scratching the surface here because I haven't even mentioned the gambling corners, mahjong, or the small business sim that sucked hours of my life away. The breadth and depth of this game are such that you can get lost in the game both literally and metaphorically, and with a runtime between 50 to 70 hours, there's a lot of fun to be had. I picked up the PlayStation 4 version of the game at launch, but Sega are bros and provided a free upgrade to the PlayStation 5 version, so I was able to experience the game in all 4Ks of glory. The district of Ijincho feels extremely well realized, and the game, to my eye, looks nicely rendered. It doesn't take full advantage of the PlayStation 5's ray tracing or anything, but it runs buttery smooth. Facial animations are pretty nice during various cutscenes, and the animations picked up some really nice subtle expressions. Keep an eye on the animations around the characters' eyes, and you'll recognize some actual subtle emotions coming through that I'm just not used to seeing in the cel-shaded variety of anime-style RPGs that I tend to experience most often. And the fact that these are all presented on the PlayStation 4 version of the game has me really excited for what to expect when the games are made for the PlayStation 5 exclusively. The music of Like a Dragon, not just the karaoke, but during combat and setting the tone of various cutscenes, is absolutely masterful, while ensuring that it remains a supporting role when it comes to the emotional storytelling. Seldom does the soundtrack take center stage, but it works for a game such as Like a Dragon, with its split personality that can swivel between sophisticated drama and irreverent humor with a fluidity that somehow almost never felt startling. And I think that a good deal of that has to do with the game's music not constantly setting a specific tone, but rather letting the ambient sounds take over in between storyline-related events. The game's soundtrack eases players from the highs and lows of Ichiban's successes and failures. Yakuza Like a Dragon marks a significant pivot point for the series with its transition to turn-based RPG mechanics. The game masterfully introduces Ichiban Kasuga, an infectiously optimistic protagonist whose love for classic RPGs like Dragon Quest shaped the unique combat system. With its mix of serious storyline, humorous side quests, and variety of minigames, Like a Dragon offers a rich, entertaining experience from beginning to end.
Games like this are few and far between. It's chicken soup for my JRPG-loving soul. It's meta, it's candid, it's not afraid to take itself seriously from time to time, but it doesn't forget that games are meant to be fun as much as they are meant to be cinema and literature. And now the game has a sequel coming out? You'll definitely want to give this game a shot first, because I get the distinct feeling that it lays a lot of groundwork that'll be important in the future games. And that's why Yakuza Like a Dragon has got itself a spot in the game collection.